Victor Brennan stood at the window of his Seattle penthouse, staring at the city lights below. As CEO of Nexus Technologies, one of America's most powerful tech companies, he commanded respect and wielded enormous influence. But none of that mattered now. His only son, Nathan, just 7 years old, had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. The news had shattered Victor's world completely. He could no longer sleep, no longer focus on business meetings or company strategies. Everything that once seemed important now felt meaningless. Victor immediately mobilized his vast resources, contacting the world's leading oncologists and arranging consultations with experimental treatment centers across Europe. After weeks of agonizing waiting and countless second opinions, a clinic overseas offered a glimmer of hope: an experimental transplant procedure. It was risky, unproven, and came with no guarantees, but it represented Nathan's only chance at survival. Without hesitation, Victor agreed to everything, offering billions of dollars to make it happen. He arranged for Nathan's care at Riverside Medical Center's exclusive private wing, where a specially cleared section would be completely isolated and secured. Victor hired private security teams, brought in specialized medical equipment, and ensured that only the most trusted doctors and nurses would have access to his son. Money was no object when it came to saving Nathan's life. Olivia Reyes sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills and final notices. At 35, she was a single mother who had just lost her job at a hotel chain where she'd worked for years. Her savings were gone, rent was overdue, and she was terrified about how she would provide for her young son. Then, through a friend's connection, she heard about a cleaning position at the Brennan estate. The job came suddenly and urgently. They needed someone immediately. The pay was significantly better than anything she'd earned before, enough to solve her financial crisis. Olivia didn't hesitate. She accepted without asking too many questions. When she arrived at the massive Brennan mansion for her first day, she was overwhelmed by its size and luxury. She was given strict instructions: be quiet, respectful, and follow all orders precisely. More importantly, she was required to sign extensive legal agreements, promising absolute silence about the family, particularly about Nathan's medical condition. The rules were clear. Any breach of confidentiality would result in immediate termination and possible legal action. Olivia understood the gravity of the situation. She noticed the heavy atmosphere in the house, the absence of smiles, and the tension among the staff. Everyone moved carefully, speaking in hushed tones. She learned that Nathan was receiving treatment in a private hospital wing and that Victor Brennan rarely left his son's side. Olivia focused on doing her job well, keeping her head down and staying out of conversations that didn't concern her. 3 weeks into her employment, Olivia was assigned additional night shifts at the hospital wing where Nathan was being treated. She had seen the boy before, but only from a distance or when he was sleeping. The private wing was heavily guarded and eerily quiet, with only a few staff members moving through the sterile corridors. One night, while cleaning one of the patient rooms according to her assigned checklist, Olivia walked into what she thought was an empty room. To her surprise, Nathan was awake, sitting up slightly in his hospital bed. His small face was pale, and dark circles shadowed his eyes, but he looked directly at her with an expression that seemed both hopeful and confused. Before Olivia could speak or quietly excuse herself, the boy whispered a single word: "Mommy." His voice was so soft and fragile that it made Olivia's heart ache. Then, just as quickly, Nathan's eyes closed and he drifted back to sleep, leaving Olivia standing frozen in the doorway. She quietly finished her cleaning duties and left the room, but the encounter stayed with her. She couldn't stop thinking about the look in Nathan's eyes or the sadness in his voice. Something about the moment felt wrong, though she couldn't explain why. Over the following days, the image of Nathan calling out to her haunted Olivia's thoughts. She found herself paying closer attention during her shifts, watching more carefully, noticing details she might have otherwise overlooked. As Olivia continued working in the hospital wing, she began noticing strange inconsistencies that didn't make sense for such a high-level medical facility. Medical documents were sometimes left carelessly on counters or near trash bins instead of being properly filed or secured. She saw charts with pages that appeared to be missing or placed in the wrong patient folders. One evening, she watched a nurse throw away an entire sealed package of expensive medication without opening it. When Olivia glanced into the trash later, she saw several unused syringes still in their sterile packaging. She wasn't a medical professional, but even she knew that seemed wasteful and unusual. Another time, she entered a supply room and found a nurse who looked startled and nervous, quickly hiding something under her coat before leaving without explanation. Olivia also noticed that Nathan's treatment seemed surprisingly simple for someone supposedly suffering from aggressive cancer. He received mostly clear fluids and vitamin solutions through his IV, but she never witnessed any of the complex procedures or heavy medications she would have expected. There were no visible preparations for an urgent transplant, no specialized equipment being tested, and no medical team conducting the intensive pre-surgical protocols she'd read about online. The more shifts Olivia worked, the more questions filled her mind. Why were important medications being discarded? Why were medical records so disorganized? Why did the staff seem so anxious whenever she was nearby? One night, Olivia was taking out trash from the hospital wing's back corridor when she noticed movement in a dimly lit hallway near the service entrance. She paused, instinctively stepping back into the shadows. Two men stood together in what appeared to be a private conversation. One was Dr. Lawrence Park, the lead physician overseeing Nathan's case. She recognized him from his frequent visits to Nathan's room. The other was a man in an expensive suit whom Olivia didn't recognize. She watched quietly as the suited man reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope that looked heavy and well-filled. He handed it to Dr. Park, who glanced around nervously before accepting it and quickly slipping it inside his coat pocket. The exchange lasted only seconds, and then both men walked away in opposite directions without speaking further. Olivia's stomach churned. She stood frozen, trying to process what she just witnessed. The next morning, she overheard two staff members mentioning that a corporate representative from Nexus Technologies had visited the hospital the previous evening to check on Nathan's condition. The pieces started connecting in Olivia's mind. Why would someone from Victor Brennan's own company be secretly paying Nathan's doctor in a back hallway? She tried to tell herself there could be an innocent explanation. Maybe it was a donation or some kind of hospital payment, but the secretive nature of the exchange made that seem unlikely. The image of Dr. Park nervously pocketing the envelope stayed with her, fueling her growing suspicion that something deeply wrong was happening. Olivia's unease continued to grow until she finally decided she needed to talk to someone. She approached Rebecca, one of the nurses who had always been kind and friendly to her during breaks. Late one evening in the staff break room, when they were alone, Olivia cautiously mentioned what she had seen: the envelope exchange, the unused medications being thrown away, and the strange inconsistencies in Nathan's treatment. Rebecca's warm smile immediately vanished. Her face became cold and tense. She looked around the empty break room nervously before leaning closer to Olivia and speaking in a harsh whisper. "You need to stop asking questions right now," Rebecca said firmly. "You don't understand how things work here. If you want to keep your job and stay out of trouble, you'll forget everything you think you saw and stop talking about it. Do you understand me?" Olivia was stunned by the severity of Rebecca's reaction. It felt like more than a suggestion. It was a warning, possibly even a threat. Rebecca quickly left the break room without another word, leaving Olivia sitting alone and shaken. The warning felt serious and genuine, as if Rebecca knew something dangerous that she couldn't or wouldn't share. From that moment on, the friendly atmosphere between them disappeared completely. Rebecca avoided eye contact and stopped speaking to Olivia altogether. Then, less than a week later, Olivia heard that Rebecca had been suddenly terminated. No explanation was given, and none of the other staff members were willing to discuss it. Everyone acted as if it was perfectly normal, but Olivia knew better. The message was clear. Asking questions was dangerous, and those who spoke up would be silenced one way or another. After Rebecca's warning and sudden termination, Olivia knew she had to be more careful, but she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. She made a decision that frightened her but felt necessary. She would quietly gather evidence. Whenever she found medical documents or reports that mentioned Nathan's name during her cleaning duties, she would carefully take them before they were destroyed. Sometimes it was a printed lab report with unusual numbers. Other times it was a page from a medical chart or a document with the hospital's official letterhead. She didn't take everything, only items that seemed important or suspicious, and she was extremely cautious not to be caught. Olivia hid these papers in a large envelope that she kept inside her work bag, taking them home after each shift. At her small kitchen table, late into the night after her own son was asleep, she would spread out the documents and study them carefully. Many of the medical terms were confusing and unfamiliar, so she used her phone to search for definitions and explanations, refusing to give up even when the information seemed overwhelming. The more she read, the stranger everything became. Some reports appeared to be years old, printed long before Nathan's cancer diagnosis was supposedly made. One document showed test results with a date from before Nathan was even born, which made no logical sense. Another had a doctor's signature that appeared identical across multiple different forms, as if it had been digitally copied and pasted rather than signed individually each time. She also found medication lists that included drugs she had never actually seen administered to Nathan, along with diagnosis codes that didn't match the information on his current hospital chart. Feeling increasingly unsafe and uncertain about what to do with the evidence she'd collected, Olivia decided to seek legal advice. She contacted a small local attorney's office and scheduled a consultation for the following afternoon. But as she walked home from work that evening, something felt wrong. Olivia noticed two men in dark clothing following her at a distance. When she crossed the street, they crossed too. When she slowed her pace, they slowed as well. Her heart began racing with fear. She walked faster, constantly glancing over her shoulder, until she finally reached her apartment building and rushed inside, locking the door behind her with trembling hands. She checked every room and window, terrified that someone might have followed her all the way home. The next evening, when Olivia returned from her shift at the Brennan estate, she found her apartment door slightly open. Someone had broken in. Her belongings had been moved around and searched through. Drawers left partially open, cushions displaced. Her work bag had been emptied, and the envelope containing her collected documents had clearly been handled. All the papers were out of order, as if someone had gone through each page carefully before hastily putting them back. Strangely, nothing was actually stolen. Her old phone, the small amount of cash she kept in a drawer, and her electronics were all still there. The intruders had only been interested in one thing: the medical documents. The message was clear and terrifying. Someone knew exactly what she was doing, and they wanted her to know they were watching. Olivia felt sick with fear, but she also felt angry. She tried to stay calm and act normal, but everything had changed. Despite the break-in and the constant feeling of being watched, Olivia continued reporting to work, though she was now extremely cautious about everything she did and said. The hostile atmosphere had intensified. Other staff members avoided her. Conversations stopped when she entered a room, and she felt eyes following her constantly. Then, late one evening, while she was cleaning in a quiet section of the hospital wing, a young man in a white medical coat approached her. He looked around carefully before speaking her name softly. Olivia turned, instantly cautious. The man introduced himself as Dr. Cameron Walsh, a resident doctor working under the main medical team treating Nathan. Olivia didn't recognize him at first, but he explained that he had seen her around and knew what she had been trying to uncover. Cameron told her that several weeks earlier, he had accidentally discovered part of the evidence she had hidden, some documents that had fallen behind a cabinet in a supply room. He had read just enough to realize that something was seriously wrong with Nathan's test results and treatment records. The numbers didn't match, the timeline made no sense, and some of the medications listed weren't appropriate for Nathan's supposed condition. Cameron looked nervous as he spoke, constantly checking to make sure they were alone. He explained that he wanted to help because he believed her suspicions were correct, but he also warned her to be extremely careful. He said too many powerful people were involved in Nathan's case, and questioning anything openly had already made him a target of gossip among senior staff members. Cameron suggested they work together, but only in secret. He made Olivia promise not to mention his name to anyone. Over the next several days, Cameron took enormous risks to access information that could prove what was really happening to Nathan. Working late at night when most of the hospital staff had gone home, he used his medical credentials to log into Riverside Medical Center's secure database. Olivia stood watch in the hallway, her heart pounding with anxiety, ready to warn him if anyone approached. After entering multiple passwords and navigating through layers of security, Cameron finally located the files labeled under Nathan Brennan's name, specifically the original medical examinations from the very beginning of his supposed illness. He downloaded everything onto a flash drive and printed copies of the most important documents. Later, in a quiet supply room with the door locked, they carefully reviewed the files together, page by page. What they discovered was absolutely devastating. There were no signs of cancer anywhere in Nathan's original test results. His blood work was completely clean and normal. The scans showed no tumors, no abnormalities, and no indication of disease whatsoever. Cameron, with his medical training, double-checked all the codes, notes, and technical terminology. It was undeniable. Nathan had never shown any cancer cells at all. The entire diagnosis had been fabricated from the beginning. Olivia felt physically sick as the reality sank in. But they didn't stop there. Over the following nights, Cameron continued digging deeper through the hospital's files, moving carefully to avoid detection. He discovered that every single doctor responsible for Nathan's case had direct financial connections to a company called Vertex Medical Group. At first, the name meant nothing to Olivia, but when Cameron explained that Vertex Medical Group was actually a subsidiary secretly owned by Nexus Technologies, Victor Brennan's own company, everything suddenly made horrifying sense. Armed with undeniable evidence and knowing they might never get another chance, Olivia and Cameron made a desperate decision. They would confront Victor Brennan directly. Olivia discovered that a private board meeting was scheduled at Nexus Technologies' main headquarters. Without permission, clearance, or any invitation, she walked into the building that morning, dressed in her regular clothes and carrying a folder full of evidence. Security guards tried to stop her, but she pushed past them with determination fueled by weeks of fear and frustration. She burst into the executive boardroom where Victor sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by executives in expensive suits. Everything stopped. All conversations ceased as every face turned toward her in shock and anger. Olivia raised her voice and placed a tablet on the polished table. Cameron had helped her compile short video clips and audio recordings, conversations between staff members, mentions of forged medical records, and discussions about hidden treatments. The recordings played out loud in the stunned silence. At first, Victor was absolutely furious. He stood up abruptly, his face red with rage, shouting and demanding that security remove her immediately. But then his eyes fell on one particular document that Olivia had placed directly in front of him. He suddenly froze mid-sentence. The paper contained a handwritten signature and medical notes that looked painfully familiar. Victor's hands trembled as he picked up the document. The signature belonged to Dr. Thomas Whitmore, his late wife's most trusted physician, the doctor who had cared for her during her final illness. But Dr. Whitmore had died 2 years ago. Yet here was his signature on a document supposedly dated just 3 weeks earlier, part of Nathan's current treatment plan. The handwriting was identical, clearly copied from old files. Victor's face went pale as the impossible reality crashed down on him. The silence in the boardroom was deafening as Victor slowly sat back down, staring at the forged signature that had shattered his certainty. He said nothing for a long moment, then quietly ordered everyone except his most trusted legal advisor to leave the room. Once the executives had filed out, Victor asked Olivia and Cameron to explain everything they had found, and this time he actually listened. They showed him the complete file, Nathan's clean, original test results, the fake diagnosis documents, the financial connections between his doctors and Vertex Medical Group, and the evidence that medications were being used not to treat Nathan, but to artificially create symptoms that mimicked terminal illness. Victor's face remained expressionless, but his hands shook as he turned each page. Finally, he gave orders to launch an immediate private investigation, instructing his legal team to verify every piece of evidence independently and to follow every lead, no matter where it went or whom it implicated. Within 72 hours, the investigation confirmed everything. Dr. Lawrence Park, the lead surgeon, suddenly fled the country without warning, abandoning his practice and disappearing. 3 of the nurses who had been most involved in Nathan's direct care also vanished, leaving no forwarding information. Internal emails were hastily deleted, though forensic teams recovered them. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Victor, his voice hollow and broken, personally contacted law enforcement and federal health authorities. He provided them with complete access to all files, financial records, and internal communications. An official criminal investigation was opened immediately. Police officers arrived at Riverside Medical Center with warrants. Computers and servers were seized. Entire departments were temporarily shut down. Doctors and administrators were brought in for questioning. The entire operation was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own lies. As the investigation expanded, the most urgent priority became Nathan's immediate medical care. A completely independent team of doctors, professionals with no connection to Nexus Technologies, Vertex Medical Group, or Riverside Medical Center, was brought in to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of Nathan's true health. Victor stood by anxiously as the new medical team performed their examination. They ran fresh blood tests, new imaging scans, and thorough physical assessments. After several days of careful analysis, the independent doctors delivered their official report. Nathan was completely healthy. There were no cancer cells, no tumors, no signs of any disease whatsoever. He had never been sick with cancer at all. The symptoms he had displayed, the fatigue, loss of appetite, pale complexion, and general weakness, had all been artificially caused by the medications he was being given. The doctors explained that certain drugs had been deliberately administered to Nathan to create physical symptoms that mimic the appearance of terminal illness, making the fake diagnosis seem believable to everyone around him, including his father. These drugs were stopped immediately. Within days, Nathan's condition began to improve dramatically. His natural color started returning to his face. His energy levels increased noticeably. His appetite came back, and he started asking for his favorite foods. He began sleeping better, without the restless nights and confusion that had plagued him for months. He even started to smile and laugh again, something Victor hadn't seen in what felt like forever. Therapists were brought in to help Nathan process the trauma of everything he had experienced, and he was enrolled in a specialized program to support children who had suffered medical abuse. Slowly but surely, Nathan was reclaiming the childhood that had been stolen from him. The criminal trial that followed became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in the nation's history. Courtrooms were filled to capacity every single day, with news cameras stationed outside from dawn until night. The evidence presented was staggering in its scope and cruelty. Prosecutors demonstrated how Vertex Medical Group had been operating an elaborate fraud scheme for years, specifically targeting wealthy families with fabricated terminal diagnoses for their children. The company used sophisticated methods, digitally altered lab results, forged signatures from real doctors, fake medical consultations, and carefully controlled medications that induce symptoms without causing permanent harm. The goal was never to heal anyone. It was to exploit desperate parents and drain their fortunes through endless experimental treatments that never actually existed. Families from across the country came forward with similar stories once Nathan's case became public. Some had lost children not to disease, but to the very drugs that were supposed to cure them. The trial revealed that Vertex Medical Group had stolen billions of dollars over nearly a decade. The verdicts were severe and swift. Lead executives received sentences exceeding 30 years in federal prison. Dr. Lawrence Park was arrested overseas and extradited to face charges including fraud, medical malpractice, and child endangerment. Other doctors and administrators involved received varying sentences, but none escaped consequences. Olivia was completely cleared of all previous accusations against her. The charges of data theft and professional misconduct were formally dismissed, and she received a public apology from Riverside Medical Center. She was awarded the Medal of Civic Honor in a ceremony at the state capitol, recognized for her courage and persistence in exposing the truth. Dr. Cameron Walsh was promoted to clinical director of the newly established Brennan Foundation for Medical Ethics, an organization funded by half of Victor's personal wealth. Several years passed, and the world slowly moved forward from the scandal, though the changes it sparked remained permanent. Olivia and Cameron, whose partnership had grown into something much deeper, were married in a quiet ceremony attended only by close friends and family. Among the guests was Nathan, now a healthy teenager who had not only survived his ordeal, but had thrived beyond it. He excelled in school, played on sports teams, and had developed a keen interest in medicine and law, fields where he hoped to make a difference and prevent others from suffering as he had. Nathan often told people that Olivia was like a second mother to him, and their bond remained strong and genuine. Victor Brennan had withdrawn almost entirely from public life following the trial. He moved to a secluded property far from Seattle, where he lived quietly with minimal staff, focused entirely on rebuilding his relationship with Nathan and supporting the foundation's work from a distance. He donated continuously to medical oversight programs, legal support for whistleblowers, and family assistance funds. Though he rarely gave interviews or made public appearances, his financial contributions continued to fund investigations that protected patients across the country. Olivia and Cameron founded a new organization dedicated specifically to protecting healthcare whistleblowers, providing legal counseling, secure reporting systems, and financial support for those who risk their careers to expose corruption. The Brennan case had become a symbol of what could go wrong in privatized medicine, but also of what courage and persistence could achieve. New laws were passed requiring greater transparency in medical diagnoses and treatment plans. What had begun as one woman's quiet suspicion had transformed into a national movement for medical justice and patient protection.